Parents said we're broke. Then spent $50,000 on sister's second wedding. I'm 32, male, the kind of person who grew up being told that money was tight, that sacrifice was noble, and that family takes care of family. I believed all three of those things for a long time. I believed them through 4 years of community college because I couldn't afford a university. I believed them when I took out $28,000 in student loans my parents said they couldn't help with. I believed them when my wife and I got married in a park gazebo with 40 people, a potluck reception, and a cake my mother-in-law made herself. Because when I'd quietly asked my parents if they could contribute anything, my father had sat across from me with the expression of a man delivering difficult news and said, "Son, we just don't have it." I was 27 then. I didn't argue. I figured that was just the hand we'd all been dealt. My sister is 3 years younger than me and has never, in my living memory, been told no by either of our parents. She got a car at 16. I got a bus pass. She got her college tuition fully covered. Same university I couldn't afford. When I asked about that discrepancy, my mother said the rates had been different, the timing had been different, things had improved. I dropped it. My sister graduated with zero debt and a study abroad semester in Italy that I found out about afterward. Her first marriage lasted 2 years. He was fine, a decent guy she'd outgrown, according to her. The divorce was mutual, uncomplicated, and handled by a mediator. I know because my parents paid for her attorney anyway, even though she didn't need one. I know because she told me without noticing how it sounded. She started dating her current partner 18 months after the divorce. By month 6, she was talking about a wedding. By month 9, it was a venue. By month 12, the number $50,000 had entered family conversation so casually, so completely without friction, that it took me 3 separate instances of hearing it before I processed what I was actually absorbing. The venue alone was $14,000. Custom dress, $3,800. Photographer and videographer package, $6,500. Catering for 120 guests. Floral arrangements. A live band. A rehearsal dinner the night before at a restaurant that required a reservation deposit. I heard all of these details and pieces across family dinners and phone calls, and each piece sat fine on its own until I finally lined them up and did the math a person with a finance background does automatically. I called my father on a Tuesday night in February, after the venue deposit had cleared but before the invitations went out. "I need to ask you something directly," I said. "Sure," he said. The easy confidence of a man who hadn't expected the question yet. "How much are you and Mom putting into the wedding?" Pause. Not long. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But it was there. "We're helping out where we can," he said. "Ballpark." Another pause. "We've committed to covering most of it." "It's her wedding." "It's her second wedding," I said. Not cruelly, just factually. That's not a fair way to frame it. "Dad," I kept my voice even. "You told me you couldn't contribute to my wedding. You told me you couldn't help with my student loans. I have been paying those loans for 5 years. And now you're telling me you're covering most of a $50,000 event." The silence on the other end of that call was the kind that doesn't have a good answer inside it. Just the sound of someone looking for one. "Your situation was different," he finally said. "How?" He couldn't tell me. He said we'd talk about it in person, that phone calls weren't the right format for this conversation, that he loved me and didn't want this to become something bigger than it needed to be. I told him I loved him too and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the word different for a long time. Because different wasn't an explanation. It was a placeholder. And placeholders, in my experience, are where the real information is hiding. The in-person conversation happened at my parents' house 2 Sundays later. My wife didn't come. I asked her to sit this one out, and she understood without me explaining fully, which is one of the reasons I married her. My sister was there. I hadn't expected that. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I arrived, which told me my parents had arranged it that way deliberately, either as reinforcement or because they genuinely didn't understand why it was a problem. My sister opened before I could. I heard you're upset about the wedding. I have questions, I said. About the finances. It's mom and dad's money, she said. They can spend it how they want. 3 years ago, dad told me they didn't have any. She did something with her face, a brief, involuntary micro-expression that I've seen before and always meant the same thing. She knew something she wasn't going to say. Things changed, she said. $50,000 worth of change. I said, because that's not inflation. That's a different financial situation entirely. My father came in from the hallway. Sat down. My mother stayed near the counter. She does that when she's uncomfortable, stays at the edge of the room like she might need to leave it quickly. We've had some help recently, my father said. An investment that came through. It doesn't change what the situation was when you were asking. What investment? That's private. You're spending it on a family event, I said. I'm part of the family. What investment? My sister cut in. Why does it matter? You're married. You had your wedding. You want them to write you a check now to make it even. I want to understand why the rule was different for me. Because you had a wife who had family helping, my sister said. It came out sharp, fast, the kind of thing that's been waiting to be said. I looked at her. My mother-in-law made a cake. That's not the same category. You turned out fine, my sister said. You have a good job. You're not hurting. That's not the point. Then what is the point? I looked at both my parents. My mother had turned toward the window. My father was studying the table. The point, I said slowly, is that I was told you had nothing. I made decisions based on that. I took on debt based on that. I planned a wedding based on that. And now I'm watching you write checks for a venue and a florist and a live band, and nobody's even attempting to explain the discrepancy. That's the point. My father started to say something about how they tried to do right by both of us, that it wasn't about fairness, that family was complicated. My sister talked over him. You're making this about you and my wedding planning, which is honestly so typical. There it was. 11 words that told me exactly what I was dealing with. I didn't respond to her. I looked at my father. I want to see the investment documentation. Whatever came through. I'd like to understand the timeline. His jaw tightened. I'm not going to show you our personal financial documents. Then I'm going to start asking questions until I understand it some other way, I said. My sister stood up. This is unbelievable. This is literally my wedding. It's your second one, I said, and walked out, that I'm not impulsive by nature. I didn't do anything for 2 weeks after that conversation. I went to work, came home, had dinner with my wife, slept. But my brain was running the problem in the background on a loop, the way it does when something doesn't add up. The investment my father mentioned. That was the thread. I started where anyone with internet access starts. Public records. My parents have owned their house for 26 years. I pulled the property record as a baseline. What I found attached to it was a second lien filed 4 years ago, satisfied 18 months ago. A home equity line of credit, $75,000. Opened when my father told me they had nothing. Paid off recently. I sat with that. A $75,000 helic. Opened 3 years before my wedding. Available when I needed loan help. Available when I was asking about contributing to anything. I called my mother's sister, my aunt, who has always been the straight-talking member of the extended family. Asked her, carefully, if she knew anything about my parents' financial situation over the last few years. She was quiet for a moment. Then, your grandfather left money when he passed. Did your parents not tell you? My grandfather had died 6 years ago. I remembered the funeral. I remember my father giving a eulogy. I did not remember any conversation about an inheritance. How much? I asked. I don't know exactly, she said, but it wasn't small. My understanding was it was split between your father and your uncle. Your uncle bought a boat. She paused. Your parents said they were going to be responsible with it. I thanked her, hung up. An inheritance from my grandfather. A $75,000 helic that had been opened and paid off. And a running narrative maintained for years that my parents had nothing to give. Here's where it turned from disappointment into something colder. I had a conversation with my wife that night, showed her what I'd found, walked her through the timeline. She listened the way she always does, completely without interruption. Your student loans, she said. The timing. I know. They had the helic open when you were asking for help with those. Yes. And the inheritance would have been right around the time we were planning the wedding. My wife is not a confrontational person. She's measured and fair and almost never says anything she'll regret. So when she looked at me and said, "That's not a financial situation. That's a choice they made repeatedly," I felt the weight of it land in a way I wouldn't have if I'd said it myself. The thing about my sister, the detail I'd been circling without landing on, was the micro-expression she'd made when I mentioned the discrepancy. That brief flicker. She knew something that I sent her a text. Not aggressive. Plain. I know about the inheritance and the helic. I'm not trying to blow anything up, but I think you know more about the family finances than you've been letting on. If there's something you want to tell me before I start asking questions more publicly, now's the time. She didn't respond for 3 days. Then call me. Not mom and dad's house. Just me. I called her, and what she told me, in a halting, defensive, but ultimately complete admission, was this. She had known about the inheritance since the year it came through. My parents had told her, shown her the amount, discussed how they planned to use it, included her in decisions. They had collectively decided not to tell me because, as my sister put it, Dad thought you'd ask for some of it and it would cause a fight. So instead, the decision had been made silently. They'd maintained the broke narrative. Let me take loans. Let me plan a park wedding. Let me believe I was asking for something they didn't have. And now they were spending the remaining sum on her second wedding. I didn't say anything for a long moment on that call. Then I said, "Were you ever going to tell me?" Silence. Then, "Probably not." The wedding was 6 weeks out. Invitations had gone. The venue deposit was non-refundable. Everything was in motion. I made 3 decisions. Deliberately. In order. The first was a consultation with a family law and estate attorney. I laid out the full picture. The inheritance, the timeline, the documented helic, the student loan period, the years of maintained financial misrepresentation. She told me plainly that if my grandfather's will had specified equal distribution among children or grandchildren, and that distribution had been redirected or concealed, there could be grounds for a claim against the estate. She pulled the probate record with my authorization. It was public. My grandfather's will had left his estate to be divided equally among my children. My father and my uncle had been the 2 children. There was no provision excluding grandchildren. There is also no documentation that my father had ever disclosed the inheritance to me or offered any portion of it, despite years of direct conversations about my financial hardship. The attorney said, "This won't be a fast process, but you have standing to file a claim against your father's share of the estate distribution if you can demonstrate concealment of assets that affected your material decisions." I didn't file anything. Not yet. I told her to prepare the documentation, so it was ready. The second decision was a conversation with my father. At his house, alone, without my sister or my mother in the room. I told my father exactly what I knew, the hellic dates, the inheritance timeline, what my grandfathers will actually said, what my aunt had confirmed, what my sister had admitted. I put it on the table the same way I'd put the restaurant check on the table 4 months earlier, factually, without heat. My father's first response was denial. Brief, unconvincing. His second was justification. It was his inheritance, his father, his right to manage it as he saw fit. I'm not arguing your right to the money, I said. I'm saying you told me you didn't have any while you had it. You let me borrow $28,000 and spend 5 years repaying it while you had a $75,000 line of credit open and an inheritance coming. And now you're spending what's left on a $50,000 party. It's your sister's wedding. Her second one, I said. And my wedding cost you nothing because you said there was nothing. My father looked older in that moment than I'd ever seen him. The justifications had run out. What do you want? He asked. I want you to pay off my remaining student loan balance, I said. $14,200. I want it done before the wedding date. And I want you to acknowledge, once directly, that the story you told me for years wasn't true. He started to respond with something about how that wasn't how family worked, about how I was reducing everything to dollars. You reduced it to dollars when you wrote the checks, I said. I'm just asking you to be consistent. My sister found out about the conversation before the week was out. She called me furious. This was harassment. I was ruining her wedding. I was weaponizing money against the family because I couldn't stand to see her happy. The entitlement in her voice was almost architectural, load-bearing, the kind of thing that had been built up over decades of never being told no. I'm not ruining anything, I said. I'm asking for what should have been offered years ago. You're threatening legal action over a family inheritance during my wedding planning. I haven't filed anything, I said. I've had a conversation with my father about correcting something that was done wrong. That's between him and me. She tried 4 more angles in that call. I let each one land and didn't move. The loan balance was transferred to my account 11 days before the wedding. My father sent it without a note. I confirmed receipt and said thank you. The acknowledgement came 3 days later in a text from my father, short and plain. I should have handled things differently when you needed help. I'm sorry. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but it was real in a way that the justifications hadn't been. I went to the wedding, sat at the family table, watched my sister walk down the aisle in a $3,800 dress toward a man who seemed genuinely happy to see her, which counted for something. My mother cried. The band was good. The food was better than I expected. My father and I didn't say much that night. But at one point, near the end of the reception, he came and stood next to me at the edge of the dance floor and watched the room without speaking. After a minute, he said, "You're doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "You?" He nodded slowly. That was it. That was the whole conversation. But it was the first one in a long time that didn't have anything hidden underneath it. I drove home with my wife at 11 p.m. The loan balance cleared, the documentation filed away in a folder I hoped I'd never need to open, and a strange, quiet feeling of a person who stopped waiting to be treated fairly and went ahead and handled it themselves. I'm not angry anymore. Anger's expensive, and I've been watching my money more carefully than ever lately. You did the math right alongside me this whole story. If you've got that kind of attention to detail, subscribe, because the next one is just as calculated and twice as satisfying.